Japan has outlasted every empire that ever tried to claim it. Warlords butchered each other across its mountains for 100 unbroken years. 2 atomic bombs vaporized entire cities in a single morning. Foreign powers twice attempted to swallow it whole, and twice the sea answered on its behalf. And through every catastrophe, every betrayal, every fire and flood and reinvention, one institution endured. A dynasty so ancient it claims descent from the sun itself. Using advanced AI reconstruction, we've taken crumbling imperial scrolls, centuries-old woodblock prints, and faded wartime photographs and rebuilt them into vivid, living scenes. So you won't just hear this history, you'll watch it breathe. 14,500 BCE. Picture a Japan you wouldn't recognize. Sea levels are lower. The islands are partially tethered to the Asian mainland by land bridges. Ice Age winds rake the coastline. And yet, people are here, and they are making things. You're looking at a fragment of fired clay pressed with twisted rope before hardening. It is among the oldest pottery ever discovered on Earth. The people who made it, the Jōmon, named for those distinctive cord marks, were hunter-gatherers, but do not underestimate them. They built permanent villages. They held ritual ceremonies. They sculpted clay figurines called dogu, with wide goggle eyes and distended torsos that look unlike anything else produced in the ancient world. For more than 14,000 years, longer than the entire span of recorded Western civilization, the Jōmon held these islands. Then, around 300 BCE, someone arrives. The Yayoi cross from the Korean peninsula and the Chinese mainland, and they carry with them a technology that will remake the landscape: wet rice agriculture. Picture flooded paddies spreading across the coastal lowlands, bronze tools, then iron, surplus grain, then hierarchy. Within generations, the Yayoi don't simply settle alongside the Jōmon, they absorb them through intermarriage and displacement, leaving the Jōmon lineage as a faint genetic watermark on the modern Japanese population. The rice surplus does something no hunting society can sustain. It creates enough food to free some people entirely from finding it, and those people accumulate power. Dozens of competing chiefdoms rise. They war, they trade, they negotiate marriages, and from the tangle of these alliances, one clan begins to pull ahead. 300 CE. The dominant clan is the Yamato, and they announce their supremacy in the most literal way imaginable, by reshaping the earth itself. You're looking at a burial mound, kofun, from high above, and its shape is unmistakable. A keyhole pressed into the Japanese landscape, some stretching over 400 meters from end to end, longer at their base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Inside, bronze mirrors, iron swords, clay warriors on horseback called haniwa, arranged in silent procession around the dead. These are not the graves of men. These are the graves of gods. Because the Yamato claim their lineage doesn't begin with a powerful ancestor, it begins with Amaterasu, goddess of the sun. That claim, that the emperor is of divine descent, creates the oldest continuously reigning royal dynasty on the planet. It has not been seriously challenged in 1,700 years. But divine ancestry alone doesn't hold a court together. What the Yamato court needs and what it is about to receive is an entirely new philosophy of governance. 538 CE. A diplomatic gift arrives from the Korean kingdom of Bakche. Bronze Buddhist statues, sacred texts, and monks trained to explain them. Buddhism lands in Japan not as a religion, but as a package, carrying with it Chinese writing, Confucian ethics, and a model of centralized imperial rule that the Yamato court desperately wants. The man who seizes this moment is Prince Shotoku, regent to his aunt, Empress Suiko. He is 31 years old when, in 604 CE, he drafts Japan's first governing document, the 17-article Constitution. It is less a legal code than a moral vision. Article 1 commands, "Harmony is to be valued." He dies at 48 and is venerated as a bodhisattva for over a millennium afterward, the man who taught Japan how to borrow from China without becoming China. Yet beneath the philosophical ambition, the court is a cage of competing clans. The powerful Soga family controls access to the imperial line through strategic marriage, effectively reducing emperors to ceremonial prompts. A coup in 645 CE, the Taika reform, tears the Soga from power and attempts to reorganize Japan along Tang dynasty lines. The land belongs to the emperor, taxed uniformly, administered by bureaucrats. The state is trying to be born. The birth is difficult. 710 CE. Japan builds its first permanent capital, and it is built to impress. Heijō-kyo, near modern Nara, is laid out on a precise grid, copied directly from the Tang dynasty capital of Chang'an, with broad boulevards and a palace compound at its northern center. The Nara period lasts only 74 years, but its output is staggering. In 712, the Kojiki, Records of Ancient Matters, is compiled. Japan's creation myth, its divine genealogy, its first emperors committed to writing for the first time. In 720, the Nihon Shoki follows, and rising over the city like a thunderclap in bronze, the Todaiji Temple's great Buddha, 15 meters tall, cast from 500 tons of metal, the largest bronze statue on Earth at the time of its completion. But the Buddhist monasteries grow enormously wealthy, enormously political. Emperor Kanmu decides the only solution is distance. In 794, he moves the court 45 kilometers north. 794 CE. The new capital is called Heian-kyo, capital of peace and tranquility. We call it Kyoto. For nearly 4 centuries, it will be the most refined city in the world and one of the most insulated. Notice what the Heian court prizes, not military power, not territorial expansion, but the quality of a poem written in response to a romantic affair, the precise layering of a silk robe, the elegance of folded calligraphy. A noblewoman judges a suitor's character entirely by his handwriting. This is the world that produces Murasaki Shikubu, a lady-in-waiting who, around 1008 CE, writes The Tale of Genji in the Japanese vernacular script, not in Chinese, the official language of men, with such psychological precision that scholars still debate whether it constitutes the world's first novel. The political reality beneath all this beauty is controlled by one family, the Fujiwara. They don't seize the throne, they marry into it, generation after generation, becoming regents for child emperors, retiring those emperors the moment they develop independent opinions. Power through silk and ceremony. But by the late 11th century, retired emperors begin governing from Buddhist monasteries, Insei, trying to claw authority back. Nobody wins cleanly. Instead, 2 great warrior clans, summoned to the capital to fight the court's proxy battles, begin to eye the prize themselves. 1180 CE, the Genpei War begins. For 5 years, the Taira and the Minamoto clans tear Japan apart. The Taira hold Kyoto, install a child emperor, and for a moment control everything. Then the Minamoto regroup, and in 1185, at the naval battle of Dan no Ura in the narrow Shimonoseki Strait, the Minamoto fleet destroys them. The Taira throw their 8-year-old emperor into the sea rather than surrender him. He drowns with his grandmother's arms around him. Minamoto no Yoritomo does not march to Kyoto in triumph. Instead, he sets his government 500 kilometers away in the seaside town of Kamakura and takes the title shogun, supreme military commander. The emperor still reigns in Kyoto, the shogun rules everywhere else. This division, imperial ceremony versus military reality, will define Japanese politics for the next 680 years. The samurai age has begun, and it will immediately face a test unlike anything these islands have ever seen. 1274. A fleet of 900 vessels carrying 23,000 Mongol and Korean soldiers departs from the Korean coast for Kyushu. The Japanese defenders have never encountered explosive projectiles or massed cavalry tactics. They are pushed back. And then, a storm. The Mongol fleet turns for home. Kublai Khan does not accept this. In 1281, he sends a second armada, over 140,000 men across 4,400 ships, one of the largest seaborne invasion forces in the medieval world. The Japanese hold the beaches for 6 weeks. Then, another storm, a typhoon of biblical scale, shreds the fleet in a single night. The Japanese call these storms kamikaze, divine winds, sent by heaven to protect the sacred islands. The word will resurface 664 years later in a context drained of all triumph. 1333. The Kamakura shogunate collapses. Emperor Go-Daigo refuses to be a ceremonial prop, rallies disaffected samurai, and dismantles the system. But the general he depends on, Ashikaga Takauji, immediately turns against him, installs a rival emperor, and founds a new shogunate in Kyoto's Muromachi district. For 56 years, Japan has 2 imperial courts, one in Kyoto, one in the mountain fortress of Yoshino, each claiming sole legitimacy. 2 emperors, 2 sets of ministers, 2 coronations. The Muromachi era produces extraordinary culture. No theater, inkwash landscape painting, the tea ceremony as spiritual discipline. It also produces weakness. The shogunate cannot control its own vassals. In 1467, the Onin War breaks out over a succession dispute and burns Kyoto to the ground. The conflict lasts a decade. Central authority evaporates, and what follows is one of the most brutal centuries in Japanese history, the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. 100 years of warlords, sieges, and betrayals, with no force strong enough to stop any of it. Until one man decides he is that force. 1543. A Portuguese trading ship runs aground on the southern island of Tanegashima. The sailors carry firearms. Within 2 decades, Japanese smiths are producing arquebuses by the tens of thousands. Oda Nobunaga sees what this means before anyone else does. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, he lines up 3,000 arquebusiers behind wooden palisades and fires them in rotating volleys, annihilating the mounted cavalry charge of the Takeda clan, one of the most feared in Japan. It is one of the first battles in world history decided principally by gunpowder infantry. Nobunaga doesn't just win with new weapons. He thinks in an entirely new way. He tears down internal toll gates. He opens free markets. He destroys the power of the great Buddhist monasteries, including the fortress temple of Enryakuji on Mount Hiei, which he burns to the ground in 1571, killing an estimated 20,000 monks and civilians. He is terrifying. He is transformative. He never finishes what he started. In 1582, his general Akechi Mitsuhide surrounds him at the Honnoji Temple in Kyoto with overwhelming force. Betrayed, outnumbered, Nobunaga dies in the flames. He is 48 years old. Whether by fire or by his own blade, the sources cannot agree. Toyotomi Hideyoshi avenges Nobunaga within 11 days, destroys Mitsuhide, and completes Japan's unification. He is the most improbable figure in the story. Born a peasant, the son of a farmer, no family name, no sword lineage. He rises through sheer genius and charm to rule the entire archipelago. He cannot become shogun. That title requires Minamoto blood he doesn't have, so he creates a new title and rules anyway. Then he decides Japan isn't enough. He invades Korea, twice, in 1592 and 1597, aiming at China beyond it. Both campaigns collapse, ruinously, consuming lives and treasure. Hideyoshi dies in 1598, and the last thing he does is beg his council to protect his 5-year-old son. They do not. October 21st, 1600. On a fog-blanketed plain called Sekigahara in central Honshu, the future of Japan is decided in a single day. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the most patient of Hideyoshi's former allies, commands the Eastern Army. Mitsunari leads the Western. Roughly 160,000 men face each other in the mist. By afternoon, a key defection tips the scales, and the Western Army breaks. The battle lasts approximately 6 hours. Ieyasu is declared shogun in 1603. He has no intention of making Hideyoshi's mistake. He establishes his government in the fishing village of Edo, modern Tokyo, and designs a system so carefully balanced it will hold unbroken for 265 years. Daimyo are required to spend alternating years in Edo and their home domains, a hostage system dressed as protocol. Christianity is banned. In 1639, foreign travel is prohibited under penalty of death. Trade is funneled through a single artificial island in Nagasaki Harbor. Japan locks the door. 1603 to 1853. Inside the sealed kingdom, something extraordinary happens. The city of Edo grows from a fishing village to a metropolis of over 1 million people by the early 1700s, one of the largest cities on Earth. A merchant class rises, gets rich, and invents its own culture. Ukiyo-e woodblock prints, kabuki theater, haiku poetry, and the refined street culture of the floating world. In the fields, rice yields improve, life expectancy climbs, literacy spreads. But outside the locked door, the Industrial Revolution is reshaping the world. Steam, steel, gunboats. July 8, 1853. 4 black American warships, steam-powered, ironclad, bristling with 61 guns, sail into Edo Bay. Commodore Matthew Perry's orders are simple: open Japan to American trade. He doesn't need to fire a single shot. The ships alone communicate the message. Japan's wooden coastal defenses would last perhaps an hour against them. The shogunate signs a trade treaty in 1854, a second, more sweeping treaty in 1858, and the act of capitulation to foreign pressure after 250 years of proud isolation delegitimizes the Tokugawa regime completely. The samurai clans that despise the shogunate's weakness rally around a radical idea: restore the emperor to real power, modernize at any cost, never be vulnerable again. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration ends the shogunate. Emperor Mutsuhito, 15 years old, is placed at the center of a new order. His reign name means enlightened rule. What follows is the fastest industrialization in human history. Within 30 years, Japan builds a modern navy, a conscripted army, a railroad network, a national public education system, and a constitutional government. Foreign advisors, German engineers, French legal scholars, British naval architects are hired, studied, mastered, and then sent home. Japan doesn't want to become the West, it wants to beat the West. By 1895, Japan defeats China in a war lasting 8 months, annexing Taiwan and establishing itself as a regional power. By 1905, it defeats Russia, a European great power, in the Russo-Japanese War, becoming the first Asian nation to defeat a Western power in modern warfare. The world takes notice. But the modernization produces not just industry and military power, it produces a hunger that cannot be satisfied by those islands alone. December 7, 1941. Japanese carrier aircraft attack the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, killing 2,403 Americans and drawing the U.S. into the Pacific War. Across Asia, Japanese forces sweep through Malaya, the Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, and Burma, an empire assembled in months. By 1944, the tide has turned. American island hopping across the Pacific brings B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands. The firebombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9th through 10th, 1945, kills an estimated 80,000 people in a single night and burns 16 square miles of the city to ash. Japan does not surrender.
August 6th, 1945. 8:15 in the morning, Hiroshima. A single American bomber releases a single weapon. The atomic bomb kills an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people instantly. By the end of 1945, the death toll reaches approximately 140,000. 3 days later, A second bomb falls on Nagasaki, another 70,000 dead before the year ends. On August 15th, the Japanese people hear their emperor's voice for the first time, over the radio, in an archaic dialect most of them struggle to understand, announcing surrender. He does not use the word surrender. He says Japan must endure the unendurable. 1945 to 1952. Japan is occupied by American forces under General Douglas MacArthur. The emperor remains, stripped of divinity by a press release, January 1, 1946. A new constitution written in 9 days by American lawyers takes effect in 1947. Article 9 forever renounces war. The country that built the largest battleships in history becomes, constitutionally, a pacifist state. And then, from the rubble, Japan does what no nation had ever quite done before. Between 1955 and 1973, Japan's economy grows at an average annual rate of roughly 10% year after year for nearly 2 decades. Companies like Toyota, Sony, and Panasonic become household names worldwide. By 1968, exactly 100 years after the Meiji Restoration, Japan becomes the world's second largest economy, surpassing West Germany. The 1973 oil shock hits Japan hard. It imports 99% of its oil. But instead of collapsing, it adapts. Japanese industry pivots to fuel efficiency and precision manufacturing and emerges stronger. The 1980s bring the bubble. Land prices in Tokyo rise so high that the imperial palace grounds are theoretically worth more than the entire state of California. Japanese corporations buy Rockefeller Center. Golf club memberships sell for millions of dollars. Art prices at Tokyo auctions break world records weekly. In December 1989, the Nikkei stock index peaked at 38,957. Within 3 years, it loses 60% of its value. What follows is called the lost decade, then the lost 2 decades, then the lost 3 decades. Deflation, demographic decline, an aging society, and a shrinking workforce become Japan's defining national challenges. And yet, Japan does not break. March 11, 2011. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake, one of the most powerful ever recorded, strikes off Japan's northeastern coast, triggering a tsunami that reaches 40 meters in height. Nearly 16,000 people die, entire towns are erased, and then the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear reactors lose power and begin to melt down. 150,000 people are evacuated from the exclusion zone. Japan calls it its worst crisis since the Second World War. And again, Japan does not break. Today, Japan is a country of extraordinary paradoxes. The 3rd largest economy in the world, the most punctual rail network on Earth, a society with among the highest life expectancies ever recorded. A country that has never quite resolved the question of what it is, ancient or modern, open or closed, island or empire, pacifist or power. The same country that gave the world the tea ceremony, a ritual designed around the perfection of a single quiet moment, also gave it the assembly line, the bullet train, and the video game. A nation that endured invasion, civil war, feudal centuries, foreign ships, atomic fire, and its own imperial ambition, and came through all of it still recognizably, stubbornly, specifically itself. The story of Japan is not a story about inevitability. It is a story about choice and the extraordinary things a people can build when they decide what they are. Japan.